Okay, so remember that Wells Fargo thing a few years back?
Yeah.
Millions of fake accounts, crazy. Right, it's like a total mess. And it really shows you just how much damage fraud can do to a company.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why today we're going to dive into this report, Responding to Fraud Risk.
Right.
It's from the Institute of Internal Auditors, the IIA.
Right.
And it's based on, this huge global survey they did of internal audit folks. Really interesting stuff.
Yeah, it is. One thing that I thought was interesting was, globally, only 19% of executive management think of fraud as like a top 5 risk. But then when you look at internal auditors, it jumps to 31%.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it could be that internal auditors are just more tuned in to how fraud can actually happen.
Right.
When you think about regulations like Sarbanes-Oxley and COSO, they really push auditors to make fraud, prevention, detection top priority. And by the way, COSO, that's like this framework for managing risk and internal controls that's used all over.
Okay, yeah. So internal auditors are kind of forced to think about fraud all the time.
Yeah.
And management, maybe not so much.
Right.
And what's even more interesting is that this gap isn't just like a global thing. It actually changes depending on where you are in the world. So for example, over 50% of the people they talked to in South Asia said fraud was like their top concern.
Yeah.
But then you look at North America, it was only around 22%.
Huh. That is a big difference.
Huge. Why do you think that is?
Well, South Asia, especially India, they're going through this massive economic transformation, lots of growth.
Right.
And with that comes tougher regulations, more awareness, reputational risk, and this big push for transparency. So all those things kind of put a spotlight on fraud prevention.
It's like fraud is front and center.
Exactly.
But then, you see that difference and you wonder, does North America have a false sense of security?
It's possible. I mean, their anti-fraud programs are generally pretty mature, which could lead to some complacency, I guess.
Right.
But the thing is, fraudsters, they never stop. They're always figuring out new tricks.
Oh, for sure.
So organizations everywhere, they got to stay on top of it.
They do. So if internal auditors think fraud's a bigger risk, how are they actually dealing with it? The report says only 29% of chief audit executives, those are the CAEs, see fraud investigation as like a main thing their teams do. And only 3.5% of audit plans actually focus on fraud.
Right.
Those numbers seem pretty low.
Yeah.
Especially given that they see fraud as a higher risk.
Yeah. Well, you got to remember, fraud investigations, they can be a huge drain on resources.
How so?
Well, think about it. You've got to interview people, you've got to collect all this evidence, and sometimes you even have to work with, law enforcement.
Right.
It takes a lot of time, which means auditors are pulled away from other important stuff.
Makes sense. But here's something I don't get. So they're not spending a lot of time on investigations, but then 88% of internal auditors still say they're at least somewhat responsible for finding fraud.
Yeah.
How does that work?
That's a good point. It really highlights how internal audit works. See, they might not always be the ones doing the, full-on investigations.
Right.
But they are definitely responsible for checking how good a company's anti-fraud controls actually are.
I see.
So it's more about building the framework to stop fraud from happening in the first place.
So they're not always like the detectives on a case,
Right.
but they're making sure the security system is working.
Exactly. And that's where the 3 lines of defense comes in.
Okay.
It's this model that says, look, managing fraud risk, it's not just internal audit's job. It's a shared responsibility. You've got management setting the tone at the top, then you've got dedicated risk management people, and then internal audit comes in and provides that independent check.
It's like a 3-pronged attack on fraud.
I like that. Each line plays a crucial role.
So speaking of roles, the report found some interesting differences in who takes the lead on fraud depending on where you are in the world and what kind of organization it is.
Oh, really?
Yeah. For example, internal audit seems to be way more involved in privately held companies and in regions like South Asia. What do you make of that?
Well, privately held companies, they often don't have the resources for big, dedicated risk management departments.
Right.
So internal audit kind of has to step in and take on more responsibility.
Makes sense.
It's out of necessity.
Yeah.
And in regions like South Asia, where everyone's already so focused on fraud, it makes sense that internal audit would have a bigger role.
Yeah.
It just fits with the culture and the priorities there.
So internal audit's involvement really just depends on the situation.
Right.
It's about adapting to the needs and the risks of each each organization in each region.
Exactly. One size fits all doesn't work with fraud risk.
Definitely not.
No way.
Now, I want to talk about something that's really changed the game when it comes to fighting fraud.
Okay.
Data analytics.
Oh, yeah.
The report actually says it's like a key tool for auditors now.
It is.
What makes it so powerful?
Well, imagine like a detective,
Okay.
but with superpowers, able to see these tiny little clues in mountains and mountains of data.
Right.
That's what data analytics can do.
Oh, wow.
It can sift through tons of information, find patterns, red flags, anomalies,
Yeah.
things a human would probably miss.
It's like giving auditors X-ray vision for fraud.
Exactly.
But the report also says data analytics shouldn't just be an internal audit tool, right?
Absolutely not. To really get the most out of it,
Yeah.
you need to bake it into the whole organization.
The whole thing.
Yeah. Think about it.
Right.
Monitoring transactions as they happen, doing risk assessments in real time, even using predictive modeling to see where fraud might pop up next.
Wow.
When you give people at every level those kinds of insights driven by data, you get a much more proactive culture, one that can really resist fraud.
So it's not just having the tech, it's using it the right way.
That's it.
Across the board.
Yeah, exactly.
Moving from reacting to fraud to stopping it before it even happens.
Exactly.
Okay, so before we finish up,
Yeah.
I want to go over the specific things the report recommends.
Okay.
They have 5 key actions for organizations
Right.
to make their fraud risk management stronger.
Okay.
First, they say you got to clearly define what internal audit's role is when it comes to fraud risk management.
So responsibilities, authority, resources.
Lay it all out.
Yeah.
Second, educate management about how real fraud risk is.
Yeah.
And how important that 3-pronged approach is, that 3 lines of defense model.
Really drive that home.
Right.
Yeah.
Third, be proactive, not reactive.
Okay.
Do regular fraud risk assessments
Yep.
and focus on the riskiest areas.
So don't just wait for something to happen.
Exactly.
Right.
I like that. Okay, what's number 4?
Number 4 is to build a database
Okay.
of lessons learned from past fraud cases.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, looking back at what went wrong
Yeah.
can help you tighten up your controls
Right.
and prevent the same thing from happening again.
It's like learning from your mistakes, but as a whole organization.
Exactly.
What's the last one?
The 5th recommendation is to make sure your internal audit team has the right skills
Oh, right.
and expertise
Yeah.
to handle fraud risk.
Okay.
This might mean specialized training, hiring people with, certifications like a certified fraud examiner, or even, outsourcing some parts of fraud risk management to the experts.
So make sure your team has what they need to get the job done.
Yeah, give them the tools to succeed.
This report really covers a lot, doesn't it?
It does.
We've got understanding how people see fraud risk differently
Right.
to the actual steps to protect yourself.
It's a good overview.
Yeah.
And I think it shows how managing fraud risk well isn't just about checking boxes
No.
or following a checklist.
Right.
It's got to be part of the culture.
Like a mindset, ongoing communication, everyone working together.
At every level of the organization.
It's like building a fortress.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
instead of, bricks and mortar,
Yeah.
you're using knowledge, awareness, being proactive
That's a great way to put it.
to build your defenses.
And remember, those fraudsters are always coming up with new stuff.
Yeah.
So organizations need to keep up, be adaptable, be innovative.
Stay ahead of the game.
Exactly.
This has been really interesting
Yeah.
exploring this report with you.
Lots to think about.
We've talked about the differences between management and internal audit, how people see fraud risk all over the world,
Right.
even how data analytics can be used.
Like a secret weapon.
Yeah, exactly. But it feels like we've only just, scratched the surface.
We have.
There's always more to learn about this stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So this deep dive, it's given our listeners a good start.
Good foundation.
Yeah. But now it's time to actually use this knowledge.
In the real world.
Exactly. Fraud can happen anywhere.
Anywhere.
Your organization, even your personal life.
It's true.
So here's something to think about.
Okay.
Knowing how tricky fraud can be, what can people do to make a culture that's more aware of it?
That's a great question.
No matter what you do.
Yeah.
Management, internal audit, whatever.
Everyone's got a role to play.
Everyone's got to protect their organization.
And themselves.
Exactly. So let us know what you think.
Yeah, share your thoughts.
Keep this conversation going
Let's all work together.
to make the world a little more fraud resilient.
Sounds good to me.
All right. That's it for this deep dive.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay vigilant.